I always believed that if something was wrong in my marriage, I would sense it immediately, that there would be a shift, an undeniable change in the way my wife, Serafina, looked at me, spoke to me, touched me. But the truth is, when betrayal sneaks into your life, it doesn't announce itself with flashing lights and sirens. It seeps in slowly, camouflaged beneath routine, disguising itself as normalcy until one day, you realize you don't recognize the person sleeping beside you. For me, it all started with the car. Serafina had never been one to care much about vehicles. As long as her car got her from point A to point B, she was content. But a few months ago, she became obsessed with upgrading. She started talking about how she wanted something sleek, something that felt new and exciting. I found it odd but brushed it off. Then out of nowhere, she came home with a brand new sports car. Midnight blue, low to the ground, faster than anything she had ever shown interest in before. I remember standing in the driveway, watching as she stepped out, her face glowing with excitement. "Do you love it?" she asked, practically bouncing on her heels. I forced a smile. "It's different for you." She grinned, running her fingers along the hood. "I just wanted a change, something fresh, something fun." I nodded, but something felt off. For the first time in our 8-year marriage, Serafina had made a major financial decision without discussing it with me. She had always been responsible, cautious with money. And yet, here she was, dropping a small fortune on a car that was the complete opposite of what she had always been comfortable with. That night, I casually asked, "So, what made you finally go for it?" She shrugged, not looking up from her phone. "Just felt like the right time." Something in her tone told me that wasn't the whole truth. The late-night drives began. At first, I tried to ignore it. People change. Maybe she just wanted to feel something new, something exciting. But then she started taking late-night drives. Serafina had never been a night person. She valued her sleep too much. But suddenly, at least 3 nights a week, she would grab her keys around 10 or 11 p.m. and say, "I just need some air." The first time, I didn't question it. The second time, I raised an eyebrow. By the 5th or 6th time, I knew something wasn't right. One night, as she was slipping on her jacket, I asked, "Where are you even going this late?" She hesitated for just a second, but long enough for me to catch it. "Just driving. It helps me clear my head." I nodded, watching as she walked out the door. I wanted to trust her, but something deep in my gut told me I shouldn't. The phone calls. A few weeks after she bought the car, I started noticing another change. Her phone was always on silent. Serafina had never been secretive about her phone before. She would leave it lying around, open on the kitchen counter or the nightstand. But now, it was glued to her hand. If she left it unattended, it was face down. If she got a message while we were together, she would glance at it quickly and then lock the screen. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I noticed her phone buzz. I glanced at it without thinking. New message from A. Just an initial. No full name. No context. She immediately grabbed the phone and tilted the screen away from me, typing a quick response before locking it again. "Who's A?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She barely looked up. "Oh, just a friend from work." "A friend I've never heard of." She sighed, finally turning to me with an annoyed expression. "Malric, it's nothing. Just someone from my department. We've been working on a project together. That's all." I forced a smile and nodded, but my mind was already racing. I had met almost all of Serafina's co-workers at some point. She never mentioned an A. And if it was just a friend, why was she so quick to hide the message? The receipts that changed everything. I tried to push the doubts away, but once suspicion takes hold, it's impossible to ignore. A few nights later, while she was in the shower, I noticed her jacket draped over the back of a chair. Her car keys sat next to it, and something inside me, some quiet, desperate need for confirmation, made me reach into her pocket. I pulled out a crumpled receipt. A bar, a fancy one, a place we had never been to together, and at the bottom, 2 drinks. 2. I gripped the receipt so tightly my knuckles turned white. She wasn't just driving. She wasn't just clearing her head. She was meeting someone. I shoved the receipt back into her pocket just as I heard the water turn off. My heart was pounding, my mind spinning with possibilities. I had 2 choices: confront her now, demand answers, risk an argument that might end in more lies, or wait, gather more proof, catch her in the act. I took a deep breath and forced myself to stay calm. I needed to be smart about this. Serafina walked into the room, towel wrapped around her, smiling at me like nothing was wrong. And for the first time in 8 years, I smiled back at her, knowing I was about to uncover the truth. I spent the next few days in a daze, replaying everything in my head. The new car, the late-night drives, the text from A, the bar receipt with 2 drinks. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how blind I had been. But I wasn't going to be blind anymore. I had one goal now: find out exactly what Serafina was hiding. That night, when she grabbed her keys and said she was going for a drive, I forced a smile and nodded. But as soon as she pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my own keys and followed her. I kept my distance, careful not to get too close. My heart pounded with every turn she took, every red light she stopped at. I half expected her to actually be driving aimlessly, just clearing her mind like she had claimed. But she wasn't. She had a destination. After about 20 minutes, she pulled into a parking lot near the same fancy bar from the receipt. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I watched her step out of the car. She checked her reflection in the window, smoothed down her dress, and then walked toward the entrance with a purpose. My stomach twisted. She was meeting someone. I parked farther down the street, waiting, watching. 15 minutes passed, then 20. My mind was spinning with worst-case scenarios. Was she sitting at the bar, waiting for him? Was she laughing at his jokes, touching his arm like she used to touch mine? I had to see for myself. I pulled my hood up, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The place was dimly lit, filled with the low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses. My eyes scanned the room quickly, searching, finding her. Serafina was sitting in a booth near the back, and she wasn't alone. A man sat across from her, tall, dark hair, well-dressed, too comfortable with her. I watched as she leaned in slightly, smiling at him in a way that made my blood boil. Then, as if the universe wanted to crush me completely, she reached across the table, her fingers lightly grazing his wrist. I forced myself to stay still, to breathe, to think. I wanted to storm over there, to grab her by the wrist and demand answers. But I knew that if I did, she would lie. She would make excuses. She would twist the story. I needed more. I turned and walked out before she could see me. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying what I had seen, what I had felt in that moment. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It wasn't just suspicions. She was cheating, and I had to find out how deep it went. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her car. I felt like a thief as I opened the glove compartment, my fingers shaking slightly. But the moment I saw what was inside, my stomach dropped. A second key fob. Not for our house. Not for her work. A key fob to an apartment complex. My breath hitched. What the hell was this? I took a picture of it before carefully putting everything back. My hands were cold, my chest tight as I stepped away from the car. She wasn't just sneaking off the bars. She had somewhere else. That afternoon, I waited until she left for work. Then, with my heart pounding in my chest, I plugged the apartment complex's address into my GPS. It wasn't far, only 15 minutes away. A high-end building, the kind with a private entrance, underground parking. The kind of place where people go when they don't want to be found. I parked across the street, watching. 30 minutes passed. An hour. I was about to leave when something made my breath catch in my throat. Serafina's car, pulling into the garage. She wasn't at work. She was here. I gritted my teeth, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I had been hoping, praying, that I was wrong. But now I knew. Serafina had a secret life, and I was about to uncover every piece of it. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to think clearly. There was no point in confronting her right now. I needed more information. I needed proof. Just like when I followed her to the bar, I had to stay patient. If I wanted the truth, I had to be smart. So I waited. Another hour passed, and then I saw movement. The man from the bar. He stepped out of the building, glancing around as if checking his surroundings. He wasn't just some random guy. He was her reason for lying. My hands clenched into fists as I watched him walk toward his car, a sleek black sedan. He was successful, confident, the type of man who didn't think twice about taking another man's wife. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of his license plate. If Serafina wasn't going to tell me the truth, I would find it myself. I drove home with my mind spinning. There was no denying it anymore. She had a whole separate life. A man, a place, a secret. Now the only question was, how long had it been going on? The answer was coming. And when it did, Serafina wouldn't be able to lie her way out of it. I spent the next few days trying to act normal, but inside, I was unraveling. Every time Serafina kissed me goodbye, I wondered if she had just come from him. Every time she smiled at me, I wondered if she had smiled at him the same way. I was drowning in questions, and the only way out was to find the truth. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't confront her yet. If I wanted real answers, I needed to catch her with undeniable proof. No lies, no excuses, no twisting the story. Just the cold, hard truth. Digging into the mystery man. The first thing I did was run a background check on the man from the apartment complex. It wasn't hard. His license plate gave me everything I needed. His name was Asher Lorne, mid-30s, business consultant, recently divorced. Divorced. That word sent a fresh wave of rage through me. Had he wrecked his own marriage before deciding to go after mine? Or had Serafina been just another distraction for him? I found his social media, scrolling through pictures of his life. Trips to luxury resorts, dinners at expensive restaurants, all the things Serafina had suddenly started taking an interest in. And then, buried in his tagged photos, I found one that made my blood run cold. A picture from 2 months ago, at a wine tasting. Serafina was in the background, laughing, holding a glass, standing too close to him. She had told me she was on a work trip that weekend. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't just some fling. It had been going on for months, tracking her movements. Over the next few days, I documented everything. Every time she left the house at night, every excuse she gave, every time she claimed she was too tired for intimacy, but then suddenly had the energy to take her car out for another mystery drive. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Or maybe she thought I was too blind to notice. One night, I placed a small GPS tracker under the rear bumper of her car. It was easy. Serafina never paid attention to details like that. And once she drove off on her usual late-night drive, I opened the app and watched as the pin moved across the map, straight to Asher's apartment. She stayed there for 2 hours. Then she drove back home, crawled into bed beside me, and acted like she hadn't just spent her night with another man. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every muscle in my body tense. She had no idea that I knew everything, and I wasn't done yet. The final clue. The next day, while she was in the shower, I checked her phone. I had never done it before, never even thought about it. But now, I had no choice. She had changed her passcode. I wasn't surprised. But she had forgotten one thing. Her old phone, the one she had used before getting a new one last month, was still in the drawer by her bedside, and it was still unlocked. I turned it on, my heart pounding, and there they were, hundreds of messages, some casual, some flirty, some that made me feel like I was going to be sick. Serafina, can't wait to see you tonight. Asher, you looked amazing yesterday. I still feel you on me. Serafina, wish I could stay longer. I hate sneaking around. I clenched my fist so hard my nails dug into my palm. She hated sneaking around? Then why was she still doing it? I kept scrolling, my vision blurring with rage. Asher, when are you telling him? My breath hitched. Telling me? Telling me what? Serafina, soon. I just need to find the right time. The message was from 3 weeks ago. I dropped the phone onto the bed, my hands shaking. She was planning to leave me. All this time, while I had been trying to understand what was going on, while I had been thinking of ways to fix things, she had already made up her mind. She just hadn't told me yet. Setting the trap. I felt something inside me snap. I was done waiting, done collecting proof. It was time for her to face what she had done. That night, when she left for another one of her drives, I followed her. But this time, I didn't just sit outside. I didn't just watch from a distance. I parked my car, walked straight into the apartment complex, and took the elevator to his floor. My heart pounded as I stood in the hallway. I could hear muffled laughter from inside. I knocked. Silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. Asher's expression turned from confused to shocked the second he saw me. Malric, he said, his voice tight. Before he could close the door, I stepped inside, and there she was, Serafina, standing in the middle of his apartment, her face pale as death. She knew she had been caught. I held up my phone, pressing play on one of their messages. Serafina's own voice filled the room. Wish I could stay longer. I hate sneaking around. She covered her mouth, her entire body shaking. Malric, I cut her off. How long? My voice was cold, controlled. She swallowed hard, tears forming in her eyes. 6 months. I nodded, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. And when were you going to tell me? Or were you just going to let me figure it out on my own? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I turned to Asher, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. Was she going to tell me, Asher? Or was this just another game for you? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, man, Save it, I snapped. I don't need an apology from you. I need to hear it from her. Serafina sobbed, her hands trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh. Then why did you? She had no answer. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, when I come home from work, you won't be there. You're going to pack your things, and you're going to leave. She gasped, shaking her head. Malric, please. I turned to leave, and then, just as I reached the door, I looked over my shoulder. You wanted to find the right time to tell me, I said quietly. I met her eyes, letting her see the finality in mine. Well, congratulations, Serafina. You just found it. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. Walking out of that apartment felt like walking away from my entire life. The moment the door slammed shut behind me, the weight of everything crashed down at once. She had been planning to leave me. She had built a whole separate life behind my back. And yet, when I finally confronted her, she still had the audacity to cry, like she was the one who had been betrayed. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The rage, the heartbreak, the sheer humiliation burned inside me like wildfire. But beneath it all, there was something else. Relief. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was drowning in doubt. There was no more guessing, no more questioning myself. I had my answer. She had made her choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. The empty house. The next day, I stayed out late on purpose. I went to work, took a long drive afterward, grabbed dinner alone just to avoid the house for as long as possible. Because I knew that when I finally walked through that door, everything would be different. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was that her car was gone. The house was dark, quiet. I stepped inside, flipping on the lights, and immediately saw the difference. The small things, her shoes by the door, the framed photos of us, the little messes she always left behind, were gone. It was like she had been erased from our home. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the space where our life together used to be. And I waited for the sadness, the loneliness, the grief. But they didn't come. Instead, there was only emptiness. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of peace. The message. I didn't hear from her for 2 days. Not a single word. No apology. No last-minute excuses. No desperate pleas to fix things. It was almost like she had accepted that this was over. And then, on the third night, my phone buzzed. "Serafina, can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. I could have ignored it. I should have ignored it. But a part of me, the part that still needed closure, texted back. "Me, come by tomorrow, 6 p.m. Her reply came almost immediately. "Serafina, thank you." The last conversation. The next evening, she showed up at exactly 6 p.m. She looked different, tired, nervous, maybe even regretful. For a few seconds, we just stood there at the door, staring at each other like strangers. Then she spoke. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked in slowly, like she wasn't sure if she still belonged here. Maybe because she didn't. We sat in the living room, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. She exhaled shakily. "I needed to see you, to say I'm sorry." I leaned back, arms crossed. "Sorry for what, exactly?" "For hurting you," she whispered. "For lying. For everything." I studied her, trying to figure out if she actually meant it or if this was just another attempt to manipulate me. "And if I hadn't caught you," I asked, "would you still be sorry?" She flinched but didn't look away. "I don't know." At least she was honest now. I let out a slow breath. "Why did you do it?" She swallowed hard, her fingers twisting in her lap. I wish I had an answer that would make sense. But I don't. I was selfish. I thought something was missing. And instead of talking to you, instead of trying to fix it, I ran straight into something new. I shook my head, letting out a bitter chuckle. "And now," she hesitated, "now I realize that I was wrong, that I threw away the best thing I ever had." A flicker of pain flashed in her eyes. "I still love you, Malric." I let those words sink in. I knew she wanted me to feel them, to let them change something inside me. But they didn't. "Maybe you do," I said quietly. "But love isn't enough." Her eyes watered. "Can't we try?" I exhaled slowly, glancing around the empty house. The house that finally felt like mine again. "I don't think I want to," I admitted. She let out a shaky breath, nodding. I stood up, signaling that this conversation was over. She got the message. She walked to the door, pausing just before stepping outside. "I really am sorry," she whispered. I nodded once. "Goodbye, Serafina." She hesitated, like she wanted to say more. But in the end, she just walked away. And I let her go. Moving forward, the weeks that followed were strange. Quiet. A part of me had expected to miss her, to feel some deep, aching loss. But instead, I felt free. I started focusing on myself again, hitting the gym, going out with friends, making plans that didn't involve tiptoeing around someone else's lies. One evening, I found myself back at the same bar where I had first seen her with Asher. This time, I wasn't there to spy. I was just living. I sat at the counter, sipping my drink, when I felt someone sit down next to me. "Malric." I turned, And for the first time in a long time, I saw a familiar face that didn't bring back painful memories. It was Celia, an old friend from college. She smiled. "Wow, I haven't seen you in years." I smiled back. "Yeah, it's been a while." She tilted her head. "You okay?" And for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to lie. "Yeah," I said honestly. "I think I am." We spent the next few hours catching up, laughing, talking about everything and nothing. And as I walked her to her car later that night, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just moving on. I was finally letting go. The days after Serafina left felt surreal. I had spent so much time preparing for the inevitable, gathering proof, confronting her, forcing myself to accept the truth. But now that it was over, now that she was really gone, I expected to feel something more. Regret, sadness, maybe even guilt. But I didn't. Instead, I woke up to a house that finally felt mine. I wasn't walking on eggshells, wasn't second-guessing every conversation, wasn't wondering where she really was when she left at night. For the first time in months, I was at peace, letting go. I spent the first week cleaning, not just tidying up, but really clearing things out. Every little reminder of her, every trace of the life we had built together. The framed photos, gone. The clothes she had left behind, donated. The notes she used to leave on the fridge. The little gifts she had given me over the years. All of it. At first, I hesitated. There were moments where I found myself holding on to a memory, wondering if it deserved to stay. But then I reminded myself, she had already let go of me long before I let go of her. And that made it easier. By the second week, I started focusing on myself. I went back to the gym, picked up old hobbies, spent more time with friends, people who had noticed my absence, who had seen the way I had faded into the background while Serafina had been running around with another man. I never realized how much of myself I had lost trying to hold on to someone who wasn't holding on to me. The unexpected message. One evening, I was sitting on the back porch, a beer in hand, just enjoying the quiet, when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Serafina. I stared at the screen for a long moment before finally opening the message. "Serafina, I know I have no right to ask, but do you hate me?" I let out a slow breath, rolling the bottle between my hands. Did I? There were moments when I thought I did, when I thought I would never be able to think of her without feeling the weight of her betrayal. But now, sitting here, feeling lighter than I had in months, I realized the truth. I didn't hate her. I just didn't care anymore. I typed a simple response. "Meeth, no. I just don't love you anymore." I hit send and didn't wait for a reply. There was nothing left to say. A new chapter. A few weeks later, I found myself back at the same bar where everything had fallen apart. But this time, I wasn't there to catch a liar. I was just living. I sat at the counter, enjoying the atmosphere, when someone sat down next to me. "Celia?" She turned, surprised, before breaking into a smile. "Malric. Wow! I didn't expect to see you here." We hadn't talked much since running into each other that night, but something about seeing her now, after everything, felt different. We talked for hours, laughing, reminiscing, catching up on years we had lost. It felt easy, natural, real. As I walked her to her car, she hesitated, glancing up at me. "So, are you okay now? After everything?" I thought about it for a second. Then I smiled. "Yeah," I said honestly. "I think I am." And for the first time in a long time, I knew it was true. The end.